I think deep down people have that what if. Like, what if the sky was actually purple? And how would that happen? Or what if I had gone to a different college? What if I had turned left instead of right? What if, what if, what if? And I think a lot of people feel it in their own lives at a certain point. So I think everybody has those questions deep down, and this appeals to that. I think there's like that innate um, nature within us all of like, if we had done something different, what could that have been?
Do you love science fiction and fantasy books? You found yourself in the right dimension. Welcome to the greatest podcast in the multiverse, where each week I talk to science fiction and fantasy authors about myth, magic, and the infinite possibilities of storytelling. I'm your host, Herman Stuernagel, and I'll be taking you on a journey with some of your favorite authors, helping you to get to know them and possibly uncover some new literary gems along the way. Ready to explore? Because on this show, every conversation is a doorway into a different world. Hello, and welcome back once again to the greatest podcast in the multiverse. As I mentioned last week, this will be the final episode of this season and the last episode of 2023. But don't worry, I will be back in the new year with more episodes, more interviews of the authors that you love, and hopefully some of your new favorites. I thought that it was absolutely fitting that we would finish this season talking about multiverses, as this is the greatest podcast in the multiverse. I am so excited that I got to chat with MK Williams this week. We talked about multiverses, we talked about her book, The Infinite, and we talked about her YouTube channel and how having a channel on YouTube helped her author career. This is a fun episode. I love talking about the multiverse, and I love talking about some of these science fiction tropes with you. I hope you stay tuned. It's a great show. And make sure to check out her book, The Infinite, and her YouTube channel, which I will link in the show notes below. Without further ado, I will read her bio and we'll get started with the interview. MK Williams is an author and independent publisher. She enjoys reading and writing science fiction, adventure novels, and is a complete nerd in all aspects. She has written and published numerous books under her own name and helped several authors realize their dreams of publishing their books as well. Her latest book, The Infinite, is the first book in her Multiverse time travel series, and no, she does not have access to her own time machine for book research. Thank you, and enjoy the interview. So welcome back to the greatest podcast in the multiverse. I'm really excited today. I have a very special guest, MK Williams, and we're here to talk about one of my favorite science fiction tropes, the multiverse. Surprise, surprise that would be one of my favorite tropes going into the greatest podcast in the multiverse, but here we are. Welcome here, MK.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. When I saw the title of the podcast, I was like, that sounds like the greatest podcast in the multiverse just based on the title. So,
Yeah, well, and writing, as we'll talk about, writing a book about the multiverse, it's very fitting that you would join me today, and I'm really happy to have you. So, MK, can you get us started off here and just tell us a little bit about who you are and your writing journey?
yeah, I am a nerd in all aspects, I like to say. I started writing when I was little. I think most authors, most people who grow up to be authors have that angsty, horrible, really bad poetry phase in high school, and I identify that way. I definitely had that. And then in college, I was really lucky enough to take a special seminar class called Writing Killer Fiction.
Okay.
And it was the assignment was to write a short story at the end of the semester that would be kind of a thriller. It was max 50 pages, all this, everything built in. And I finished the semester with 100 pages of an uncompleted manuscript for my first novel.
Wow.
And so thankfully, my teacher was like, you clearly have an aptitude for this. You could like to do this. She passed me, thankfully. And I was able to take another seminar with her the following year. And she really encouraged me to like, keep at it, keep trying. And so that really set me down the path of writing long form fiction. I always thought I would be more towards that like shorter poems, shorter stories. And I really realized, I can actually write a novel and I can do that, and really enjoying that format. So that's kind of how the writing journey really began in earnest. And then being a nerd of all stripes, obviously I was drawn to science fiction as a child, and I still enjoy reading it and obviously enjoy writing it. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I was very much the same way. I'd written a lot of short stories, and I had that angsty poetry phase in high school too. But you know, it wasn't, I never thought I could write the long form novel. I didn't think I had the patience for it. I didn't think I could. So I definitely can
No.
relate to that. So since then, you've published a number of books. How many books do you have under your belt, and what are they?
I have 13 books out. Now, five of them are nonfiction. So after, putting out my first science fiction book, my second book, which is a collection of short stories, I had more people asking me, how do I write? How do I get published? How do I get my book on Amazon? It was taking up a lot of my writing time because I still had a corporate day job and a life. And so all my writing time was going to responding to questions. So I thought, okay, like, let me make a YouTube channel. That won't be time consuming.
Right.
Not. And answer these questions. And then finally, I was like, people keep asking the same questions over and over because they're just not finding my video in time. If only there was some way to give people this information. I was like, oh, I could write a book. So I have a series of books in my Author Your Ambition series that help authors. So that's the nonfiction side. On my fiction side, I like to play around. I like to read across genres, and so therefore I like to write across genres. So I have a science fiction, like dystopian, like hard sci-fi series. It's
Okay.
apocalyptic. I obviously have the Feminina series, which is sci-fi adventure, multiverse. I have a domestic thriller book. I have some short stories. So I have a little bit of everything, which is not at all the best practice for writing and publishing books. But I
Right.
wanted to write the story I wanted to write. So
Yeah.
that's what I did.
That's awesome. And those all sound very cool. I'm interested in all of those. And I think as writers, like you said, as writers, we tend to read across multiple genres where a lot of readers don't. And I think as authors, sometimes it's hard to understand why other readers aren't reading across genres and they're not sticking to the niche, or that they are sticking to a niche. So
Yeah.
yeah, I
I'd
got
say
you.
those are the best kind of readers, though, because they know what they like, they know what they want,
Yeah,
versus the readers who are like, oh, well, somebody recommended this to me. I read it and I hated it because I don't know what I like and I don't like. Like, that person, don't read my books. Figure out what
yeah,
you like. And it's okay if you don't ever read my books, if you don't like science fiction or you don't like what I
absolutely.
write. That's fine. You find what works for you.
Absolutely. It's a very good point.
Yeah.
Very good point for sure. So let's get to the root of your writing. Why do you write, and what's the motivation behind your storytelling?
So I think a lot of my creativity in storytelling and writing comes from, being the only child growing up. I had to make up all the stories for my Barbies or for my toys to play out because I didn't have any siblings to play with me. So that's kind of like the root, right? I still enjoy writing because I still enjoy telling stories. And for me, it's a way that I process the world and things that are maybe going on in the world that I feel I have no control over, that I feel like I have an opinion, but who of my couple hundred Instagram followers, who cares, and so I feel like if I can put it into a book, it helps me synthesize it, and that could be something somebody relates to. I think so much of what happens in the world is very nuanced. There's very little like good, bad, otherwise. And so when I write stories about people, I'm kind of getting to the root of who they are and why they do what they are, and it definitely helps me deal with the world better, and hopefully it makes the world a better place if people can read it and kind of glean something from it.
Right. And has your writing always been that intentional when you go into it, like from when you first started?
Yes and no. My first two novels, which will never see the light of day ever, for good reason, because they're my first two novels and they're horrible, was much more kind of processing things that happened to me. It was much more like auto fiction, which no one wants to read that. But it did help me kind of prove to myself I could write. When I set out to write Nail Biters, which was my first book that I self-published, the challenge for me was to write something that was totally new, that had, yes, the story of surviving the apocalypse as it's happening, but also trying to weave in a deeper message about humanity and saying, like, if I'm going to do this, I want it to mean something at the end. I want there to
Yeah.
be multiple layers to it. Like the books that I enjoy the most, there's the story, but then there's that's something underneath, and maybe it's subtle, or if you're like me, it's as subtle as a sledgehammer. But I did want to have that in there because I thought, the books that stick with me the most that I still think about have that. And so I wanted to challenge myself to that. And so it's much more intentional. When I usually start with a story, it's not as intentional. Like, here's the surface level story, here's the cool things that could happen, the cool twists. And then as I work through it, I realized, this is really a story about this. This is
Okay.
really, yes, it's about finding your way back home through the multiverse, and good grief, my boyfriend turned out to be a megalomaniac. That's the surface level. Okay, fun
Right.
twists. But at the core, it's like, we all have regrets in life of what could have been and who we could have been, and wanting to paint that in with the infinite. So like the story, the subtext kind of, as I'm writing through it, I kind of realize what it is and bring that out.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So
Mm.
that's something that comes to you kind of as the story develops. It's not something that you go into thinking this is going to be a multiverse story about this, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's a good segue for us to get into the next question. What does your writing process look like? How do you kind of start writing the story itself? What comes to you first?
Yeah. I'm definitely a discovery writer. So I have the idea, I have some thoughts, and anytime I get an idea for a story, I start a Word doc, and I'll just throw some ideas in there. And there
Okay.
I have a whole treasure trove of Word docs with maybe 1 or 2 pages that haven't been opened in years. But as if I keep thinking about things and bits of dialogue here, or, oh, this could happen, and who would this character be, and who are they interacting with? And I'm getting all these bits that I'm either sending myself emails of like bits of dialogue, or I'm jotting them down in a journal, and then I'm transcribing them. And so once I kind of get to a critical mass of like, what is the story about? Like then I start to create those scenes. And usually I usually get to about like the 20,000-30,000 word mark where I'm like, okay, I need a plan. This has to come together. And so I discover a bit, and then I plan a bit. And then by the end, the plan might be like, the plan's totally different than what I thought it was going to be. But I definitely take my time with it. I very much envy the authors who can sit down and outline the whole thing, and it's outlined perfectly, and then they write it.
Yeah.
And
Me
that
too.
stayed the plan. That sounds great. I would love that.
I would too. Yeah.
So yeah, I'd say it takes me longer to write because of that. And there are times where I meander, and I just think I need that, I'm driving down the highway, or I'm in the shower, eureka moment that only ever comes when I can't write, to happen with the story. So let me go back to a different one and just work on that until that moment happens. So I wish I could say it was more linear, and for myself and my time management, I wish it was more linear. But
Right. Yeah. Your process actually sounds very similar to mine, which I don't come across too often. Do you find yourself throwing out a lot of words?
yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hardest part, where I'm like, but I wrote it and it's great, or like it's good, but it's like, but does this matter to the story? And so
Yeah.
I think I've become better about that now. The current book that I have is a work in progress that I'm waiting back for edits on. There was a lot that I got red lines on, and I was like, but it's pretty and it's beautiful and it's part of this world, and why should we cut it out? And so I just created a separate Word doc. I have Word docs everywhere, and it just said things that were cut. And so in my mind, I'm like, I didn't kill that text. I didn't take it away. I was like, it's available for an extended edition later.
Right.
And I can just tell myself that. It makes it a bit easier now to part with it, even if that never comes
You'll
back.
never look at it again. Yeah.
Yeah. But now I know, well, this is what's missing. It's over here.
Yeah, I do something really similar. I have a Google Doc that I call it cutting room floor. And if I need to cut out even like a substantial paragraph, I'll chuck it in there. So I'm just like, I don't know. I don't want to just delete.
Yeah, it's tough just to hit delete and know it's gone forever. And then what if in a future draft you're like, oh, I need that back.
Yeah, I know I wrote this somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have gone back once to find something that I wrote, because I'm like, I know I wrote this at some point. So
yeah,
it has come in handy.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Save everything. Get a good external drive.
Definitely. And so where do your story ideas come from?
All over.
Yeah.
All over. Nail biters came from a crazy, creepy dream. Kind of bore that world out. The subsequent short story collection that I wrote was kind of based on the experience of nail biters and my husband being like, "Are you okay? Is your head okay? Am I safe to be near you?" And so I was like, well, that'd be kind of interesting, this play on being afraid of the author, and do they come to life? So that was kind of for the short story collection. With the Infinite, the idea came from, I was at the gym one day at my condo, and there was this guy, and he was just being a capital C creep. Like, and there's nothing he was doing that was like against the gym rules, and there was nothing he was doing that was like illegal. But I was like, I'm on the treadmill, and you very clearly have your phone up behind me, like taking a photo.
Oh,
that's creepy.
Yeah.
It's creepy. And I was just like, I just want for one day, for all of these creeps to know what it's like. If we lived in a reverse world of, it's not a patriarchy, it's a matriarchy, and the women can do whatever they want, and deal with women being creepy to men or whatever that
Mm-hmm.
opposite would be. I was like, I just went for one day. And so that's kind of where the story for what became Universe Gamma came from. And so I had a lot written in that universe and that world, and some of the political leaders and what are they dealing with and what are the things that are going on. And then I was like, okay, but how does like this narrator know that this is different and that this is weird and
Mm-hmm.
that this is opposite? And then I was like, oh, it's a multiverse. They're traveling the multiverse. Scrap everything. And so it took me months of really writing in Universe Gamma, and the majority of what I wrote didn't make the book. So I have a whole side story. I would like one day I will put out this side story of Universe Gamma,
Nice.
of everything that I had started to build to be able to create that world. So
I'm sorry that happened,
yeah.
first of all, but I'm I'm glad that it inspired this story because
Yeah.
because it is a fantastic story, and you know, but you know, inspiration for works really can come from literally anywhere,
Anywhere.
and that's really cool. But let's talk a little bit more about the Infinite. Can you tell us what it's all about and just set up the premise for us?
Yeah. So the Infinite starts on August 8th, 8/8, where Nina Marks wakes up and she's like, this isn't my bed and this isn't my house, but that's my boyfriend that I live with. And he's going off to work and he seems normal. And wow, I have a nicer wardrobe and I get to work and I have a nicer job. And oh, okay, this is nice. Like, this is a really good dream. And then she realized it is not a dream. She is awake. This is real. And she is like, how did this happen? What's going on? So she figures out that she is indeed in an alternate reality. But then she soon comes to find out that what seems like everything's great here, it's not great. And there is a very sinister reason for why she is suddenly in this reality. And she very quickly realizes, well, life isn't great at home. She wants to get home. And so she has to find her way back home across the multiverse. And, you know, calamity ensues, challenges are thrown in her way, new universes are suddenly problematic. So it's definitely along the vein of the Michael Crichton, like sci-fi adventure of, yes, there's some dark things going on, but like it's nerdy and sciencey, and let's come together and get this person back where they're supposed to be. So that's kind of where it starts. Yeah.
And I guess maybe let's back up a little bit in case somehow somebody has stumbled upon this podcast without knowing what the multiverse is. Can you just give us a brief overview of what a multiverse is and maybe a little bit more about why you decided to focus your story in a multiverse as opposed to just a single parallel world?
So a multiverse. So if you think about, we have our planet, we have our solar system, and our solar system is in a galaxy, and there are many galaxies in the universe. And so most people kind of understand, like, okay, the whole universe, that's it, that's everything. There are theories within theoretical physics that say, actually, there could be multiple universes. And if this is true, then these other things could also be true. And there are different theories of the multiverse. There's an infinite multiverse. There's a quantum multiverse. There's lots of them, and I don't remember all of them because once I picked quantum multiverse, I was like, done. Don't need to look at the other ones anymore.
Yeah.
And so I really liked the idea of having the multiverse because as I was starting to write the story and figuring out, okay, how do we get Nina to this universe where it's truly opposite of sort of patriarchy, it's matriarchy and things like that, when she's in this other universe that's like slightly upgraded tweaks to hers. And I was like, well, then we need multiple versions, so it's a multiverse. And I liked that better because a lot of the story focuses on who Nina is and why she became the person that she is. And I thought her getting to see different iterations of herself and who she could have been, or the life that she could have led, would have been more interesting than just seeing one alternative. Because I think once you know that there's one alternative, you're like, well, what else? What else could there be?
Yeah, and I mean that's a really predominant theme I think in the multiverse. Trope is, you know, the what could have been, and following what those individual choices could have led to. Yeah. So, and how much science did you use, and how much research did you have to do to create this book? Because I noticed you did use some real world names in your book. How far down that rabbit hole did you go?
Yes. So I had a fun time kind of playing with little winks here and there. So I did read several books on the topic. So I read Brian Greene's, I actually pulled up the the title. So The Hidden Reality, Parallel Universes, and the Deep Laws of the Cosmos by Brian Greene. And then I had to read a few books by Neil deGrasse Tyson to make that book make sense. But it was, and Brian Greene was kind of the Neil deGrasse Tyson of like a decade earlier, where he was a popular scientist. And clips of him speaking have been featured in other like time travel-y movies and stuff. So he's definitely that popular science author when it comes to the multiverse. So I did a lot of research on it because I wanted it to be as accurate as it could get. Like I know it's not actually accurate. Okay. Like I know I'm not a theoretical physics, but I wanted it to be real enough that somebody reading it would be like, oh, okay. Yeah. This isn't just some fanciful, I got a magical cell phone and now I'm in the multiverse. And so there were several things that I also saw as hallmarks throughout kind of multiverse fiction that I wanted to make sure I stayed true to. And there were a few things I just threw out. Like there was certain things within multiverse fiction where like you are the same person and like you will never meet your alter ego. And I was like, no, that doesn't work for my story. She's meeting her alter egos. She's going to interact with them. One thing I noticed within the research I did, but also within other multiverse books, was this idea of you need a device that helps you travel, but also your human brain would explode if you actually experience this kind of travel. And so you need to have some kind of a like psychedelic that just like chills your brain out so you can handle it. Right, because I think a lot of us who watch a lot of sci-fi are like, oh, well, I would totally know what to do in a multiverse situation. Like, yeah. Fine. And our brains would actually not be able to comprehend it. So I was like, okay, I need some science as far as what is a psychedelic that she's consuming that would have minimal side effects and how would that work? And, using terms like the quantum foam, that's like a quantum jitter, that's like actual things that came from the research that I did. So it was fun. And I think it was the most structured research that I did for a book to date. Previous ones had been more character studies. And I was like, no, I want this to feel real. I want somebody to pick this up and not be like, well, she doesn't know what she's talking about. It's like, yeah, it's fiction. I made it all up. But like,
Yeah, with some base in theoretical physics.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you did a good job of it's not super hard sci-fi. I mean, you don't need a physics degree to pick it up and understand it, right?
Yeah.
You touched on so much there.
Sorry.
That's okay. It's a big topic. What caused the decision to make you want Nina to be able to talk to herself? Because like you said, in a lot of multiverse fiction, that's something that's often skirted around and avoided. First, I guess, why do you think that is? And what made you decide to have her be able to talk to herself in that way?
Yeah. So I think that comes from this paradox of like you as a person, as a being, cannot exist in two places at once. And therefore, if you're traveling to a multiverse, you cannot be in two places at once. And so what I kind of took from that was like, well, you would be a totally different person. Like, right. So I was like, that's okay. And I wanted them to interact because for Nina's story, I wanted her to directly see who she could have been. And there's a quote, and I believe I used it as one of the epigraphs in the book, that the definition of hell is that you end your life and you see the person you could have been. And kind of thinking like, okay, so if you end your life and you see the person you could have been and maybe they're a better person, you're like, oh, I could have been a better person. Or you see, oh, things could have been worse. Okay, so like that would have been bad. And so kind of realizing that I wanted her to have that interaction point to really see like, well, would I even want to be another person? Maybe in your mind you think, if things had been different, life would have been better. And then you meet someone and you're like, well, would it have been better? And like, wanting to have those interactions. I also wanted Nina, she starts from definitely a place of kind of floating through life and just taking the hits as they come at her and not really fighting for herself. And so I wanted her to meet a version of herself that was much edgier and almost too like brassy and in your face, to say like, okay, I need like a little bit of that in my life. And so I really like the idea of them interacting, because I think for both of her alter egos, both for the Nina that we see, but also for Femi, to see like, oh, like I could have been a nicer person.
Right. Yeah. So really giving her the chance to explore herself in seeing where she could have ended up. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I think that is, it's a good way to do it. I've read, like you said, most of the multiverse books that I've read, they skirt around meeting themselves in one way or another.
And I think some of that also has to do with you're not supposed to have characters with like similar names. It's not supposed to be confusing. And I was like, no, y'all's gonna get confused. Like, this is welcome to it.
Yeah, you're welcome to the multiverse. Nothing is straightforward. Nothing is easy. So what are some of your favorite other multiverse stories, either books, films, or elsewhere?
So many. So one that I come back to that I end up endorsing a lot, and I say if you liked this book, you will like my book, is Underground Airlines by Ben H. Winters. And that's where it's kind of a multiverse in that it's alternate history, where we know somewhere out there that this could have been a way that things were told. I really like the Shades of Magic series from V.E. Schwab because it's truly you're traveling between these 3 different versions of London and the whole world around it. So I love that one. I loved the Timeless series on NBC. The show.
I didn't watch that either.
It was amazing. It was only for 3 super short seasons. I am so sad it was canceled. It was amazing. I could just binge it all the time. It was so good. It was so fun and nerdy, and definitely that like, let's go have an adventure through time type feeling. And I loved it. So those are some of the ones that really stick out to me. I did read a lot of books when I was researching this. Like A Tale for the Time Being was really good. There's so many. I like a lot of what Matt Haig has done with his Midnight Library. And he has a few that are specifically about time. Like he's like, I'm going to talk to you about time. Yes. And then after The Infinite came out, I did read Blake Crouch's Dark Matter and Recursion. So a lot of people continue to recommend multiverse fiction to me, whether it's books or movies or TV shows, just because they know clearly I have an interest in it. So
I love Dark Matter. That and actually, I think people like Dark Matter. They'll really like The Infinite because I think there's definitely some parallels there.
Nice.
And, you touched on some that I hadn't heard of and some that I really enjoy there. So I appreciate that. I'm always looking for a good multiverse story.
Yeah.
So was it difficult for you to balance the science aspect with the fantastical elements of the story?
A little, because I'd done all this research and I was like, I can't info dump and I can't flex on my research. So I have to make sure there's still a story and where things need explaining to make them clear. So it was a balance, and I'm really grateful to my beta readers and everybody who helped me revise it to say, this is too much science here and it hurts my head. Or like, I don't understand why this is happening. Where are we again? So getting some really good feedback about where people needed a bit more help to kind of remember where they are, who they're talking to, really helped me to find that balance. I think the first draft was unbalanced. In terms of super sciencey and then super character and then super sciencey and super character. So
so it's a lot of work going back and forth to balance the two. Do you have a sort of process in place where you're not just completely throwing out information that in order to strike that balance, right? Rather than just kind of rewriting something entirely, are you going in and just kind of making small edits to do that, or how does that process look for you?
So I wanted to make sure that as the information was presented, it was organic and it wasn't just somebody, Nina reading something and like, okay, that's what's going on. So you'll notice the explanations of the science come from Parker, who is the main scientist in the book, kind of explaining it to her. And like, she's like, okay, explain it to me. Like, I don't know what you do because I don't know what you do. And so knowing that anybody coming into the book is going to be like, oh yeah, I don't know. Let's go. So making sure that it's explained in a way that people understand, but clearly coming from somebody who would know it. So kind of sneaking it in that way as part of the conversations they're having about what's going on versus, oh, like so-and-so told me, blah, 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 blah. Like here's a paragraph. So trying to break it up a little bit there. Yeah. And I do still struggle with that. So I do still need people to tell me like, no, this is still too much. So any authors who are just out there feeling like this is too much, just keep asking your beta readers when it's too much and they'll tell you.
Yeah, absolutely. They sure will. So you've listed the book on Amazon as alternate history, and I realize there's not a multiverse subgenre category, but is there a difference between alternate history and a multiverse story like this, or are they close enough that most readers will pick up either way?
I think I think they're linked in a way. So when I think about The Man in the High Castle or Underground Airlines, those are very clearly alternate histories of like what could have happened if, what could have happened if. But I think as readers, we understand like, well, what could have happened if, therefore, this is in a world that is like ours. At some point, the history branched, and that's where we're getting this story that's been made up. And so within the Infinite, there are discussions of what might have been the root cause for some of these universes to be different, and understanding what that root event was, and therefore that's where it's branching. And so that's why I also list it under alternate history, because there's a very significant historical event and historical figure that shows up throughout the 4 universes that we visit, that kind of explains like, oh, okay, like I don't know why that made everything different, but they are. Like I think at one point Nina's like, well, hopefully this had nothing to do with Doritos, because I really would like some Doritos. And so kind of like just not knowing the ripple effect. And so I think there are really great alternate history books that don't even talk about if this had happened. It just dives into the story, and you kind of learn that through reading the story that, okay, this is a what if, totally different history, versus a book where it's like, hey, we're starting out in what we can all commonly accept is our universe, and then we're going to another one, and this is why it's different. So I think alternate history usually just starts in the new place. Multiverse usually jumps around, but I wanted to list that there because there is a discussion of kind of the historical events that maybe change the timelines.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and I know Amazon categories are sometimes a little bit hard to nail down as well. So.
Yeah. And then they change it on us. I'm like, thanks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But, you brought up The Man in the High Castle, and I think that's a great example of alternate history, and I haven't read the book, but I absolutely love the Amazon Prime show. I'm
going to tell you, there are two adaptations that I know exist where the adaptation is way better than the book, and I have to say The Man in the High Castle is one of them. Okay. In my opinion. Yeah. But yeah, there's usually, I'm like, oh, the book is way better than the adaptation. There's more characters. There was all these other things. They totally mess us up. So I watched the first season of The Man in the High Castle, and I was like, okay, I'll read the book. And the book, I was like, good thing I watched the show, because I have no clue what's going on. What is this? I know so many people are probably like, cancel her for canceling this book. But I did not. I'm glad that I watched the series first, because I kind of knew what was going on better. Yeah. But I will say that I think it's like in the second or third season, there's a scene in the show where I was sitting there and I was like, oh, I know what's about to happen, because this was in the book. They deviated from the book so much in the show, but then I was at that scene and I was like, this is going to be bad real soon. So they did keep that one scene. So that I knew, but other than that, I did not enjoy the book as much as I enjoyed the show.
Right.
So.
Okay. And I don't think you're the first person that has told me that either. So that's really why I haven't dived into the book yet. But yeah. What's the second movie that's better than the book, just out of curiosity?
Forrest Gump.
Oh, really? Okay. I didn't even realize that was a book, but of course it would.
Yeah.
So,
So I think the book is much more like absurdian, of just like totally far-fetched, out there. Like he goes to space with a monkey.
Oh,
like,
really?
Yeah,
okay.
Like totally out there. And almost... So in the movie, you kind of see that it's clear like Forrest Gump has some intellectual limitations. And I think in the book, they take it too far, almost like they're making fun of him.
Okay.
And I was like, this isn't comfortable. But I think in the book, they did a good job showing his growth as a person and these people that were there to help him. So I think the movie did way better, in my opinion.
So are there certain tropes that readers are expecting from a multiverse story like The Infinite?
I think people want to see some of the big things of what's different. I think people like to see some of like the little quirky differences. I'm just like, what do you mean? What do you mean there's no Doritos here? Everything else looks the same. I hope they have Nutella. I think there's always this clock of like needing to get back, that for some reason, like you cannot stay, like you need to go back and do something. I think there's always, just within science fiction in general, there's the wise old professor with a tweed coat with the patches. There's kind of like the buddy sidekick who kind of makes it funny, even though it's kind of very serious. Life and death, restore peace to the multiverse. And so I think there's some character tropes that I played to there that I didn't necessarily set out being like, I'm going to use this trope. It was just kind of like how the characters evolved. And I was like, well, good thing, kind of meets expectations. there's definitely, I think I mentioned before, there's the device that gets you across the multiverse. There's some kind of a psychedelic that helps you process all of it. There's definitely some incorrect routing tropes of like, well, I was supposed to go here, but I ended up here instead. Oops. And so that definitely shows up here. So yeah, it's fun to write, and obviously writing the sequel and now working into the third book, I get to play with some more of those. So that's fun.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. And how intentional were you going in including those tropes, or did they just naturally develop because you were a fan of multiverse stories to begin with?
It naturally developed just because I'm a fan of stories, and I obviously didn't want to. I always want to make sure my book is like unique. So sometimes I'm reading other multiverse books to be like, please don't do the thing that I just did in the story. Like, okay, good. But at the same time, like, there's still only so many different things that are going to naturally come up in the multiverse. So I just was like, okay, well, that's the way I'm telling the story. Like, that's kind of a common question people would have in the multiverse. So we're going to address that here. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Cool. And why do you think that readers are drawn to stories of multiverses?
I think deep down people have that what if. Like, what if the sky was actually purple? And how would that happen? Or what if I had gone to a different college? What if I had turned left instead of right? What if? And I think a lot of people feel that in their own lives at a certain point. I don't know if there's any person who's like, nope, my life is absolutely perfect. Because I think if they think that, they're like, oh man, what if it had gone wrong?
Right.
So I think everybody has those questions deep down, and this appeals to that. Of the what ifs and the what might have beens, and kind of exploring them. So I think there's like that innate nature within us all of like, if we had done something different, what could that have been? So
absolutely. Yes, and that is the reasoning behind, the final question of the show, which we aren't at yet, but we will get there. I'm always interested to hear everyone's answers to that question, and everyone takes a really different route with it. Some of it's, some people answer with a small decision that they made, and some people answer with a big decision that they made, because they both can affect things in really wild ways when you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was telling my wife that last week's episode, well, as we're recording this, last week's episode, it will be a few weeks ago now, when I was interviewing Zamil Akhtar, his answer was he just decided to go to a cafe one day with a friend, and they had a conversation, and because of that conversation he decided to write Gunmetal Gods, which is his best-selling novel. And he was like, if I didn't go to the cafe that day, I wouldn't have written this book, and my writing career would have taken a completely different turn. I'm like, yeah, you just decided to go out for coffee with a friend one day. And she's like, really, that's your favorite one? I'm like, yeah. How often do you decide, no, I'm not going for coffee today?
Yeah,
like, how often do you make that small of a decision and you don't know where it could have ended up? So so what can readers expect as they read your books, and what kind of emotional impact do you hope to have on them?
I think they can expect hopefully some good twists and turns. Hopefully they enjoy my twists and turns. Hopefully I'm not too heavy-handed in foreshadowing them. I think they can expect some questions that come up that the characters have to answer, that they're probably going to want to answer for themselves. I think emotionally, I try not to put my characters through anything they don't need to go through. I try not to put my readers through something they don't need to go through. So I'm not going to have just a plot twist, this person dies, unless it's truly like, well, that needed to happen for XYZ to happen. So I think I'm maybe too nice to my characters. But I will say, when they're going through emotional times, when they're having a moment, like towards the end, Nina really has a tough decision in front of her. I did it because she needed to go through that. She needed to make that decision for herself, because she finally needed to start deciding in her life and not just letting life happen to her. And so people can expect a little bit of humor and not a gratuitous amount of emotional trauma. So yeah.
Okay. Not to say that your characters don't go through a lot, because
yes,
I think they do.
They do. But it's not just for the sake of it. I think there's some books I read where I'm like, this person almost just died 10 times, like, and they're just going, like, they probably need to sit down.
Right.
Let them have a moment. So I try to give my characters that if they need it.
Yeah, give them some space to digest what's happening to them.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more? And I know I'm bouncing around a little bit here, but can you tell us a little bit about Nina, because we didn't get to talk about her too much. Can you tell us about her as a character and what it was like in creating her.
Yeah, so Nina is she works in market research. Like, so she's nerdy. She's really into math, but that's kind of led her to, I work and look at marketing data and tell companies how they can target people. So she's obviously somebody who had bigger dreams, bigger ambitions, and they've kind of festered and landed her where she is. She is with her partner Parker, but it's not a great relationship. And she even comes home one day is like, I think we just need to break up. Like, this isn't good. And that's one of the early scenes that we see of like things are suddenly different and changing. So she is a little bit meek. She's a little bit afraid to stand up for herself, afraid to make big decisions. And I think a lot of people identify with that at one point or another in their lives. And so she's very relatable. Like, you're not going to start with like, wow, I wish I was this BA female. Like, no, she's calm, she's tame, she kind of goes with the flow. And so kind of being pushed into this situation challenges her in ways that she hasn't been challenged, in ways that she didn't realize she could challenge herself, and in things that she didn't think she could ask for herself. And so she's kind of like an anti-hero in that way, where like she's not Femi. Like, when you meet Femi, you're like, oh, she knows what's up. And so, but Nina is much more of a, like, we'll figure things out. I guess that's just me. She's not going to ask people for help. She's not going to go out of her way to do something for herself. And I really enjoyed working with her through this book to see her do better. And I really enjoyed working with her in the second book too, to kind of be like, stop, just do something for yourself. Just do it.
Right.
Yeah.
And does your second book, does it follow kind of the same flow as the first? Like, is it obviously, is it a completely separate story, or are they linked story-wise?
They are linked story-wise. So I finished the Infinite, and I finished the second draft, and I was like, this is a standalone. And as I was going through additional revisions, getting draft 4 and 5, I was like, no, it's going to be a series. And so I wanted it to feel complete, though, at the end. I didn't want this to be something where somebody's like, I have to wait for book 2. So I think it feels complete at the end of book 1, but there is more to the story, and that kind of comes from with the multiverse. Like, you can't do one thing and not expect it to have a can of worms consequences elsewhere. And so the flow of the Infinite is one day, this one day a year when people can move across the multiverse. And so the Alpha Nina, which is the second book in the series, is everything from that day until that day the next year. And so we're kind of seeing the consequences of things that have happened, the ramifications of other people still moving about the universe on other times in the timeline, and kind of starting to put some things together about how Nina is handling things since this, not great day for her happened, and figuring out how the other characters that we met are kind of grappling with what happened. Like, we end the book and we know what happens to Nina, but we don't know what happens to her alter ego and other friends she picked up along the way. We don't know what happens at the end of this kind of like epic fight scene at the end, except for Nina. And she was the main character, so it was like, okay, we need to know what happens to her. But the second book definitely goes through kind of the consequences of what happened and how there might be more consequences still to come.
Right. Okay. And you said it was going to be a 3-book series.
Yes.
As of now.
As of now. So I originally envisioned 4 books.
Okay.
4 books. And I've been tinkering with book 3, and I keep coming back to the characters. I'm like, I'm getting them 90% of where they need to get by the end of book 3. I was like, just make book 3 a bit longer. Just get them, just be done. Like, I didn't think there was enough juice to say, like, then book 4 is going to be this epic adventure. I was like, book 4 is going to end up being a novella just to get everybody where they need to be. So don't do a major cliffhanger again at the end of book 3. Just finish it. So that's kind of where I see it right now. It's just actually writing it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. As is what it is in writing.
Mm-hmm.
You have the idea, it needs to be, but getting it down it's always the challenge, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, let's shift gears just a little bit here, because we do have writers that listen to the show as well. So I do want to talk a bit about your YouTube channel, because you do have a YouTube channel focused on writing, and there's some great advice there. So I want to hear more about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the YouTube channel, like I said, kind of sprung out of this need for, I needed time back for myself to write my own books, but I still wanted to answer questions for people. I still wanted people to feel as though they had a somewhat personal answer. And I was like, well, if I record myself, it feels more personal than just an email I've pre-scripted. And so I started to do that, and I enjoyed it. People said it was valuable. It took me forever to figure out how to get monetized. And when I was pregnant with my daughter, I was like, this has to be monetized in the next 9 months, or I'm not doing it anymore because I'm not going to have time. And so I got smarter and better about how I was providing information. So if you find my channel, please look at the most recent videos. You don't need to go back to the very first video. It's going to hurt your ears. It's going to hurt your eyes. But I definitely enjoy helping other authors. And I think my biggest thing is trying to help them not make the mistakes that I made early on, and saying like, please, 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 please don't do this. This will give you a headache. Anything can be fixed. It just will take a lot of time and effort and energy, and trying to help people not waste money when they're self-publishing. There's a lot of ways you can do that really quickly. So just really trying to help authors with that information. So I have videos that come out once a week on books and publishing and self-publishing and how to make a career to being a full-time author.
Awesome. Yeah, and your videos are for the most part, bite-sized as well. So they're not videos that you have to invest a lot of time into watching.
Mm-hmm. That was the whole idea. I was like, here's the answer. Get back to writing a book.
Yeah,
Stop dawdling on YouTube.
And that is what most of us need a lot of the times, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if you are writing, especially if you're new to writing, definitely check out MK's channel on YouTube, because it is very informative and there's lots of good information there.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I will link that in the show notes for you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. So what can readers expect from you next? I know you're working on book 3 of the Infinite series. What else do you have on the go?
So I have a book that is kind of like near future dystopian climate fiction that I'm looking to actually have traditionally published. So my agent and I are working through some hopefully final edits. So hopefully that'll be coming soon. And then I'm working on another book in that similar vein that has really gripped my attention. But I am getting to the point where I'm like, I need that eureka moment. So I'll probably be going back to the 3rd book in the Feminina series, and just wrapping that up, because it's going to hurt my brain if the series doesn't get finished.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Awesome. Looking forward to all of that. So, MK, we are at the end of our interview. And of course, this is the greatest podcast in the multiverse. So can you tell me about how in a parallel universe, a different choice might have shaped another version of your life?
I have so many of these moments. It's actually been really hard to pick. And I think these are times when like a decision was made for me. So I think the most consequential one was I graduated college in 2010. Nobody was hiring. Like every entry-level job was like, you need 5 years experience on a master's degree. And I was like, that's not entry level. Yeah. That is the opposite. And so I moved back in with my parents, and I had this job opportunity in Tampa, Florida. It was an insurance call center. And that was not my passion. It was not.
Not call center? No, probably not.
Call center, insurance.
Yeah.
But stable job, decent pay, like not bad pay. But it didn't require a college degree. And I was like, I just spent all this time getting a college degree. And there was an interview I had out in LA for a job that was closer to what I wanted to do. And I was like, well, LA is more exciting. And then Tampa, I want to go to LA. And so I had the flight booked. I had friends who said I could crash with them for a bit. And I was like, I'm just going to figure it out. And the day before I was supposed to get on the flight, my mom found out that she was laid off from her job.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And so I was like, So part of my plan, being a recent college guy, was like, well, my mom and dad can help me out.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, that's not going to work. And so I was like, so I could take this actual job offer where I could pay rent. I could start paying off my student loans, which are going to come due any second. I could do all these things. I was like, or I could go try and make things work in LA. That's really expensive and I don't know how it's going to happen. And what if I can't even afford a flight back? And so kind of the decision was made for me. I was like, guess I'm going to Tampa. Right. And that was very consequential because I started that job and one of my coworkers introduced me to my now husband. So yeah, that was a big fork moment in my life. Of how things could have been different. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Because not only would have your career path possibly been different, but your personal life would have been as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah. That's the biggest one.
Those big choices that don't seem, well, it probably seemed like a big choice at the time, but probably not as big as it ended up being.
Yes, because in my mind I was like, well, if this doesn't work out, I can still go out there later, or if this doesn't work, I can buy a plane ticket, like that's fine. And it turned out to be very, very different.
Yeah, and I don't realize, at the time, especially, in your 20s, assuming you're in your 20s then, but
yes.
you don't realize, the impact on the rest of your life that moving to a different city is going to have on your life, because of course you're going to meet new friends, new, coworkers, potential spouses. Is a decision that will influence the rest of your life, regardless of what decision you make.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's, that was the biggest one I could think of. There's been a few other big moments, but I was like, that's the biggest one. I'll go with that one.
Yeah. And some of those choices, though, you don't even think of as being, when you look back, as being that influential until you really think about it, because you just lived in Tampa. That's just how it was. And you don't know what it would have been like if you had gone to LA and lived that life instead.
It would have been very different. Would have been a lot more expensive too.
Yeah. Cool. So MK, can you tell our listeners where they can find you and how they can buy your books?
Yeah. So my books are available anywhere you find great books: Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo. At your local library, you can request them. So under MK Williams, there is another MK Williams. So all my social media handles are the number one MK Williams. And you say, I'm the one MK Williams. And now there's another MK Williams, but he's a guy and he very much presents as male, and I very much present as female. So if you find an MK Williams and you're like, it looks like a dude, it's not me. Go with the one that looks like a female. That's me. And then, as you mentioned, I'm on YouTube. You can just search MK Williams or search Author Your Ambition, and you'll be able to find me there. So, yeah.
Cool. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I had a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me. This was a fun conversation.
Yeah, I love it. I love talking about the multiverse, and it's great talking with someone who enjoys it too. Cool. Well, thank you very much, and we will chat with you again soon.
Okay. Bye.
Bye now.
Thank you for joining me. If you enjoyed the show, like and subscribe on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Greatest Podcast in the Multiverse. As well, you can help support the show by supporting me on Patreon. For as little as $5 a month, you can get early access to the show, as well as submit your questions for my upcoming guests. I hope to see you next time. Bye now.